melt is when I'm ocean wave.
Today on Nova Legends podcast, I have prominent Arlington attorney Mike Egge, a guy I went to law school with, and a guy who just won a huge matter with his law firm, Latham and Watkins. And I'd love to talk to Mike about his recent win and also his journey. Mike, thanks for joining me.
Thanks, Julian. Always a pleasure.
Yeah. Well, I've had Grant Hill on here and Tommy Amaker, Jill Ellis, but whenever I walk down the street, people say, when are you having Mike Egge on? I just, people have been screaming for it. So it's finally that moment. I really appreciate you doing that. I'm going to give folks the broad sketches of your career first. You're a local boy from Arlington, Virginia. Your dad was a prominent attorney. I think you guys had like 10 kids, Mike, in his family.
I'm one of 11, and I got to tell you, I'm kind of a misfit on anything that's called a legend, Julian.
Okay.
But I'm so grateful for you to include me in this pretty esteemed list of people.
Oh, no, it's great to have you, Mike. You're definitely a legend. You went to O'Connell High School, played football there, quarterback there. Went to William and Mary, played some football there as well. Then he went to UVA Law School where we met, and had a great time. Played some flag football, some softball, and then I believe when you started practicing, you went to Cleary first, and then you went to Coca-Cola. Is that correct, Mike?
Yeah, that's right. I spent a year at Morgan Lewis between Cleary and Coke, but exactly.
And then you've been to Latham for the last 15,
20 years now.
20 years. Wow, we're getting old. So anyway, Mike, that's those are the broad sketches, and I think hopefully I got most of them right.
You did.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about your recent win. You're an antitrust attorney, one of the top antitrust attorneys in the country. You've led Latham's antitrust group, and you've also, I believe, managing partner of the DC office at certain times. I know you represented Grail, and Illumina was purchasing Grail in the cancer detection space. And what made this case, I think, huge news is that the FTC, who regulates certain mergers, they were against the merger, and you guys closed over their objection, and it went to litigation. You guys won. So it was a huge case. Tell us a little bit more about that case and why it was such huge news.
Well, it's interesting because the case was huge, both professionally and personally for me, because I represented my firm represented Grail. Grail is this company that has made this, the Holy Grail of discovery. Their name comes from the Holy Grail because what they set out to do is be able to detect cancer out of a simple blood test, that you'd go get at your physical, for example, for guys our age. And it's for people that don't show any symptoms of cancer, but the earlier you're able to detect cancer, the sooner you're able to do something. Cancer is one of those diseases that catching it early before it gets to a point where it moves within your body makes a huge difference in your survival from cancer. So Grail made this great discovery. It was a discovery company, but now needing to go mass market, right? Go to the distributed to the rest of the world. They decided to get bought by their original parent, Illumina. And Illumina happens to, the reason this case got involved and the FTC got excited about it was because Illumina makes what we call genetic sequencing, next generation sequencing, which is an input into Grail's technology in being able to detect up to 50 different cancers in your bloodstream. And the FTC felt that Illumina, being dominant, or in their view, in sequencing, would favor Grail after the deal. But the trick to the deal was there was no other competition in the market. Only one company has made this discovery. Others are trying, but they're nowhere close to entering the market. So the issue then becomes, when does antitrust, when does regulation really come into play, or should it come into play in a situation like this where there's only one player out there in the field? And should the government block or slow down deals like this that are designed to get this product out to the masses? The government thought they should try to block it. and when we were able to prevail before the administrative law judge. It's under appeal now, but it was the first time ever that anyone has won within the FTC's own home court in a straight up merger situation.
Yeah. So I know this is personal to you, I believe, because your daughter Olivia had cancer and is a survivor and she's at UVA and she's doing great right now. But how did that affect the way you approach this matter?
It's kind of uncanny how, antitrust law, your personal world kind of collide. I have been very invested in cancer, as you know, ever since my daughter was diagnosed with a very rare bone cancer called osteosarcoma back in 2017. And, thank God she is now over 5 years in remission since her treatment as of last October. It has its lasting effects on her because just from all the impact it has had on her ability to walk, her leg, and just the anxiety that comes from a cancer like that, and also after effects from chemo. But that touched me profoundly, and the impact it had on her and her strength and courage to do more around osteosarcoma in particular, because it affects teens. And in particular, young athletes. It's a cancer that happens most frequently in the long bones of your body, where cell replication is happening so fast while you're growing in adolescence that something goes awry, and it kills. It's sort of a silent killer of young teens. And we obviously had to stare it down, but this case came on the heels of that. And I'm very passionate about cancer treatment, cancer detection, and it was just kind of uncanny how this came along after, or actually during, still, because I consider the fight ongoing, but it was certainly while Olivia was recovering from several surgeries and treatments.
Yeah. So, when you think about your wins in your career, this is a pretty massive win. And when articles I read, people are even questioning some of the FTC's authority now to look at certain deals. Is this, when you think about Olivia's recovery from cancer, is this probably the biggest win of your legal career?
Okay, personal versus legal. I mean, Olivia beating down cancer it was a team effort and a big win. But from a legal career standpoint, I don't know that I'd chalk this up as my biggest win. I've had harder cases. The reality is I've had harder cases where the odds were maybe greater, at least going into it, against getting the deal done, or it was at least more of a toss-up. I never thought the government should have been meddling in this one. This is a very pro-competitive vertical deal. Vertical deals are almost always pro-competitive, right? Because you're taking out a transaction, if you will, taking out a double margin, if you will. Just to use an economics sort of view of how this works. But what's interesting about it, and the fact you mentioned the closing over, the way, look, I've been doing merger antitrust all my life, all my professional life, and I believe very strongly in antitrust enforcement, but it's regulation, it's a tax, it slows businesses down, it slows really good deals for consumers down, and it's a hurdle we care about as a democracy, that we want to have these rules in place to have the deals looked at. But when it starts turning on its head, and it's actually slowing down pro-competitive deals, causing a ton of delay, there are people out there that need this test. There are people out there whose lives will be saved if they can get this test. If this test can move quickly into FDA approval and become ubiquitous, something that insurance companies cover, something that every 50-year-old and above on the street can take as a preventative matter, and maybe save their lives, or help them, in the course of treatment. So it happened to be one of those deals that actually affects the consumer in a very important way in an area that I'm really passionate about. So for that reason, it's been the most gratifying. It's caused a complete, you know, um, circus in litigation over in Europe because the Europeans followed it. I could go on for hours about it, Julian, and just in terms of the regulators around the world kind of ganging up on a deal that is truly actually an American deal. But I think that revealing how the FTC and the DOJ and our government and regulators can actually be a tax on progress. It's not what they want to do, clearly, right? They want to basically enforce the antitrust laws, something we all think is important. But you can turn things on its head, and at time when that happens, it's not good for anyone.
Well, look, congratulations again. Amazing win. It was great for my company being involved in the e-discovery part of it, and you're just glad to be on the team. Amazing opportunity for us as well. But well, Mike, let's go back to your Arlington days and your father. He was a prominent attorney. What kind of attorney was your dad, and where did he practice?
Yeah, so he was an international trade lawyer. Married, my mother's Spanish, and he fell in love with a Spaniard when he was between college and law school visiting Spain, because my grandparents were my grandfather was a colonel in the Air Force building airstrips in sort of post World War II time, and he fell in love with the girl next door, literally. Wrote letters, and finally I came back. But he fashioned his career around Spain and representing Spanish products like olives and shoes and steel, which and sort of became the guy representing Spanish trade interests in Washington. For against, for in olives, for example, the California growers were bringing countervailing duty or anti-dumping cases trying to block olive imports. I'd like to think that olives basically put all 11 of us through college. But that was a key part of his career. And he had started his career at Cleary Godley, where I did, and then formed his own firm. And then was a solo practitioner until he hung it up. And like I said, represented the olive industry for 40 years. But so he became the Mr. Everything Spanish in Washington, and had just a fantastic career.
Was he your inspiration to become a lawyer in the first place?
Gosh, I'm the only of the 11 and the oldest son, but and the only lawyer in the family. I never saw it that way, but I'd have to. I don't think I could deny it now that he had a pretty strong influence on me, definitely on football, but also in law, and it's been actually a great joy that I even to this day he always wants to talk about my cases. He can't leave it alone. But that's always been a mutual interest of ours, and there's no question whatever fire I have came in great part from him.
You and I have seen the changes in law firms and the practice of law over the years. Do you think your dad would have enjoyed practicing law today in today's environment, or do you think he caught the practice of law at a good point?
I think my father loves the practice of law generally, the blocking and tackling and of advocacy. He was a reluctant retiree. I'm not sure we even know the date certain that he ever retired, because he sort of just kept working into he's 86, 85 now, into his 70s. I would say he was still doing some stuff. I don't know that the practice has changed all that much. I mean, we do have the big law firms and the like, but the actual blocking and tackling, the nuts and bolts of lawyering, is still very, very much, I think, the same. And so I never saw, I never see him as someone from a bygone era or anything like that. I think he very much enjoy practicing today.
You once told me in law school, you had a huge family. We hang out some in the summer times. And I'm like, Mike, all these kids, I can't imagine having so many kids. I feel like I'd never be able to get ahead. And you told me back then, I remember this. You said, Julian, kids are wealth. All those kids you have, that makes you wealthy. Did you learn that from your father? And is that why he had so many kids? He wanted to be wealthy?
I say this to, I'm seeing associates that I work with starting their families and having their first kid. The first note I write to them when I hear that they have had their first child, I say, well, now you are a wealthy man or woman. It is because I really, yeah, I think my father taught certainly taught me and all of my siblings that children are the spice of life. I mean, to have, in my parents' case, they probably ensure that they'll never have anyone that they don't know that isn't blood taking care of them until their dying day. I mean, having a large family just increases the odds that you're going to be surrounded with a lot of love. Um, and and so, yeah, I think it's a great gift. I always wanted a ton of kids. That wasn't so blessed as my parents. They just viewed every one of us as a blessing, not as a burden. And down to the twins, we had 9. Then my last 2 brothers, we all grew up in Arlington, Virginia. The last 2 were twins, Peter and Paul. And I'll never forget, my mother just had a blast dressing them up every day for school. And she just thought having twins was the coolest thing since peanut butter.
Oh yeah, and you have twins yourself. So
I did.
yes. So Mike, how did you get into football?
That was all my dad. I started playing football. My father played at Auburn University. It was a big passion of his. He was a quarterback on the 1957 national championship team at Auburn. Back then they used the platoon system, so he wasn't the starter, but he got a lot of playing time going in with 11 men at a time. And on the even through a touchdown pass in the national championship season, it was largely a running team. But my dad just loves football even to this day, and he taught me to throw the football. It's all we did as father and son. And I started playing in Saturday morning league down near Barcroft in Arlington. That would have been in the 70s. It was a Saturday morning tackle football league, helmets, the whole 9 yards. And then Arlington County at the time had its own full league. It wasn't a Beltway league the way it is now. And all me and my brothers played, and my sisters were cheerleaders for the Arlington Hawks. Also we had the Toy Bowl at Washington and Lee, which was sort of our the stadium for the All-Star game at the end of the season. It's always a big treat. So football was huge for us growing up, and I love throwing a football because of my dad. And yeah, that's how I got into it.
Well, being a good Catholic boy like you are, was it inevitable that you were going to end up at O'Connell?
Oh yeah, all 11 of us went to Bishop O'Connell, and O'Connell had its day. I played with Eric Metcalf, Terry Metcalf's son, and he was a superstar, incredible to watch. And it was a lot of fun. I was a real small guy. I remember my freshman year to play, I caught 3 passes off my guard's helmet because I was so short. I was 5'4", 100 pounds. And catching your own pass is never a delight. It's a very uncomfortable thing to be the only guy of 22 people on the field that knows that the ball had just ricocheted straight up in the air. You act like you don't know where it is, and then you catch it and run. It became my play.
Yeah. Well, so the private schools are really good in football now, and they've closed the gap, or actually they've surpassed the top public school teams in Washington Post. I think it was not quite the case when you were in school. I think probably public schools were probably a little bit tougher in football. So what was the level of competition with the private schools back when you played?
Well, we played mostly in the Metro Conference, Bishop O'Connell. So, I remember playing Yorktown once. So we would play, maybe 2 or 3 games with the public schools. But then we played powerhouses like DeMatha. Gonzaga was really weak back then, by the way, for the record, if anyone's listening. They went to Gonzaga. They used to have the end zone running through the track running through the corner of their end zone. But in all events, I don't know if it just depended on where you went. Like I remember playing at Friendly High School in Maryland, in Prince George's County in Maryland, and getting totally smoked. Those guys were incredible. Yorktown at that time wasn't all that strong. I remember playing Jeb Stewart. It was competitive all the way around as far as I could tell. the Mather was really big at the time. They were the team to beat, very high in the rankings of the Washington Post.
Yeah. So what was your shining moment in your high school football career? What's your best memory?
Oof. It's interesting because I played more in my younger years, through freshman and JV football. By the time I got to my senior year, I had a falling out with the coach at the time, and ended up playing very little of my senior year, which is kind of what fired me up to go and walk on at William and Mary. And it was disappointing just because I had great high hopes and had avoided transferring and all that kind of stuff. But my greatest memory for high school was I got to play as a sophomore in a varsity game against Bishop Ireton and scored a touchdown running a ball in. And that was probably my high because I was playing way out of my league. I was a tiny guy and I got to play at the end of the game. And for me, arriving on the varsity as a sophomore was, even if it was a brief moment, was pretty darn cool.
What they call it, the triumph of the uncluttered mind. When you go out there, you don't know better, and you just succeed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The other memory I have now that you ask about it is I remember once that same year, again, a varsity scrimmage. We were playing Oakton under the lights, and I got the coach. I'm not a very fast. I was never really fast. Speed was not my strength. My strength was throwing the football. But the coach told me all of a sudden, "Hey, I want you, Egge, go in there and return the kick." And I never returned a kick in my life. I don't know what he was doing, or why he even thought of that, but I was so eager to play. I ran in there, and I'll never forget, catching the ball and then seeing the Oakton guys. They crushed me like a grape, but it was a very lively thing. I felt you never feel more alive than when you got all that adrenaline pumping in you, and it's you against the world like that.
As a football player, the punt return was the thing I hated the worst, because you had to look up and they're coming at you, but you have to look at the ball. And I returned punts, kick. I hate it. So Mike, you mentioned you went to William and Mary. What made you go to such a great school? And tell us a little bit about your days at William and Mary.
So listen, when you grow up in a family with 11 kids, your father was one of the older ones, the third oldest. Going out of state was simply not an option. I mean, my father looked at every one of us and said, "Listen, you can go anywhere you want on scholarship, because otherwise, good luck. You're going in the Commonwealth of Virginia." And all 11 of us went to Virginia schools for college. I broke the ranks. My two older sisters went to the University of Virginia. I went to William and Mary, and I went primarily. First of all, in my mind, William and Mary and UVA were the sort of the most challenging academic institutions in the state. And so I was gunning for one of those two. Got into both, but for me, it was about trying to walk on to football. I wasn't finished with football, and I was growing. I was getting bigger and adding weight, and not finally at a weight that you could start to get hit and not get killed. And so I decided that walking on at William and Mary would be easier and maybe a better ticket to getting some playing time than at UVA, which was a Division 1A school. William and Mary's Division 1 AA. And anyway, it was a great choice, turned into a ton of fun. Can't say, William and Mary had the quarterbacks I played under all went pro, or either got drafted or signed free agent contracts, but you didn't start till your fourth or fifth year there by and large. And so I lasted 2 seasons before I got hurt in the spring of my sophomore year. And to this day, I wish I hadn't hung it up at that point in time, but had an absolute blast. The program down at William and Mary was, just tops. The players, everything about it was really special.
I forgot the coach's name. Was that Laycock? Was his name?
Coach Jimmy Laycock. Yeah, and he only retired a few years ago. He was there for 40, I want to say 40 plus years as a head coach, and was an incredibly first of all, an offensive genius. So very prolific. He could take even a slow quarterback like me, and he did this with almost every quarterback he had. He was putting up 300-yard numbers per game, and that was really a credit to his system.
Yeah, he gave UVA fits. He could do a lot with little, and he also had fun doing it. I mean, they played an attractive style of football. So Mike, why'd you decide to go to UVA? I kind of remember that you took a year off before law school. Is that right?
Nope,
No,
I went straight.
straight
I went straight through. No, for UVA, boy, I got really lucky, Julian, because UVA was a love of mine growing up because my sisters had gone there. I had another brother go there. I actually started this William and Mary trend in my family. There are four of us now that went to William and Mary. But what a great combination, right? To get to go to William and Mary and school where Thomas Jefferson had actually studied some. I don't know if he actually graduated, but then the school he built over at the University of Virginia. To me, it was from a historical perspective, and as academic institutions go, I just really I felt like I got the best of both worlds, getting to go to both. UVA, for law school, I'd applied to Georgetown, Harvard, William and Mary, and UVA. Those were my four law school choices. And again, the in-state tuition was a big pull. There was never any question. Query, I didn't get into Harvard. Had I gotten in, would I have gone there? I don't think so. I think, like, knowing my dad, he might have pulled the same, you can go anywhere you want scholarship line. But no, UVA Law was an easy choice.
Yeah. Some of my best memories of law school is when Lee and I, crazy Lee Abib, will come over to, you had a house with a name,
Recoleta, yeah.
And we come over there, we'd play bocce and just hang out. Those are some of my best law school memories.
Yeah, we were really lucky to get that house, but it got passed on year after year to UVA law students. And remember, it had that garden with it had a tomb for a dog. The dog's name was Winston, and apparently it was the dog of the owner. And it had an engraved, the years of the dog's life, and it said, Winston, born a dog, died a gentleman.
Yeah, I remember that. So Mike, looking back on your UVA law school days, and you did tremendous. You were in law review. Some of the things the law schools get right. I mean, are they preparing young lawyers for the practice of law?
I go down there to recruit now, so I'm involved with law school giving and things like that, and it never ceases to amaze me that the quality of the students that come out of there. It's at this point, that's the only law school I take the time to go visit. I just enjoy it so much. I don't get to do recruiting as much as I used to in the past, but I try to make UVA top of my list. And the reason for that is I do think they're preparing I see them come out and develop at my firm as lawyers. And they're doing something right, because we have this incredibly high quotient of UVA law partners, graduates that are partners and leaders that are in what is now a 500 lawyer office in Washington.
Yeah.
And so I don't know whether they how much it's changed or anything like that. You and I got a great education there, and we had a ton of fun doing it. I think one thing that Virginia did for us is it taught us the human side of of lawyering and of law practice, and that's one of the most valuable parts of it. Whether it's mentorship or whether it's teaming with a colleague on a case or in a hard negotiation or matter, whatever the case might be. Virginia, I just feel like we spent so much time together socially and on the softball field, on the football field. That it was a complete experience. It wasn't just driving in, going to class, and then driving home kind of thing, and not interacting. We interacted, and we just had so much fun and made super lasting relationships.
Yeah, it was amazing. We were so lucky. I agree. So real quickly about your legal career.
Hey, now, Julian, before you ask me about my legal career and leave law school, I do want everyone here to know that I think you intercepted me multiple times in a critical championship game in flag football. We had this fantastic flag football league. It's probably the only time I really got serious yardage passing since high school or even Pee Wee football. But man, you took me to town. It was raining, if I recall correctly. But I think you must have picked me off at least 3 times in one game.
Well, Mike, I'm glad you brought that up. So, when you guys were in law school, your friends, you guys took sports very seriously. Charles Gildahouse, Leah Beebe, Jimmy Lovely, Gene Burris, Vern Inge, and they're on and on and on. You guys, whatever sport you'd pick up, you guys would go 100%. Andre Hollis. So you guys picked up football and flag football, and you went
And
down
Vince
and you
Haley.
that's right, Vince. Can't forget about Vincenzo. And you took it so seriously. You guys actually went to the flag football national championship down at the Sugar Bowl, and you guys had no idea the level of athletes that play flag football across the country. Came back with the tail between your legs. That was also the year the UVA was in the Sugar Bowl against was it Illinois or was it was Tennessee? But anyway, so we came back. We started our own flag football league based on this experience. And you guys were heavily favored because you'd been practicing. So we got a bunch of athletes together. It was me, Chris Ramsey. I can't remember who else was on the team. And we just sat back in the zone. Me and Chris sat back in the 2 deep zone and tried to read your eyes. And you didn't have the fastest wide receivers in the world, Mike. And so I think I was able to make an interception or two. But Charles Gildahouse.
Yeah, I have a feeling you must have filmed a few of these other games and just knew our playbook. But we were super serious about it. It was a great escape from studying, and we had practices. We had a playbook. The whole 9 yards. The amount of energy we put into that was tremendous. But also just a great joy and a lot of fun just to get out on the field and throw. And we weren't supposed to hit each other, but a little bit of that happened from time to time.
It was funny how much time we spent football, and then we had that law school basketball section league that was big, and then of course UVA started the law school softball national tournament. It was just amazing how much time UVA law students spent on sports back then.
Yeah, I mean, well, it's just another. I think it's another sort of reflection of how much time we spent together outside of the classroom, and that that was a great joy.
Yeah. Well, anyway, Mike, so you got me talking about football there. So we go to your practice when you're practicing law, and we mentioned Cleary Gottlieb, Koch. I think you said King and Spalding briefly, or was
no Morgan Lewis?
Morgan Lewis. Yeah. I'm sorry, briefly, and then Latham. When you think about your journey as a young lawyer to partner, has it changed a lot over the years, over the last 30 years? The young lawyers now, are their lives different? I mean, they make much more money than we made when we started, but their demands on them are probably more than when we started. So what is the life of a young lawyer like today?
Yeah, it's I don't know that it's any harder or easier than when we started. I because it's very demanding, right? To get to work at some of the top law firms in the city in Washington is pretty hard, right? You got to really do well in school, and you got to be driven. And those the pressure that is put on them, I don't know that that's changed a whole lot, to be honest. And nor are the keys to success. I don't think those changed much either. I do think that I worry a little bit that the young lawyers that come out think that the law firm experience is just simply a transactional experience, right? I'm going to put in a lot of time. You pay me a lot of money, and that's it. And as opposed to really digging deep and identifying with your clients in the way that's necessary to be a winner and to achieve the success for your client. It is, there's, and I also worry that the mentorship kind of is less important, or less valued by the younger lawyers, when I think that makes a huge difference in someone's career, right? Being a student of another and picking up the craft. COVID has, my firm, we had our most productive years during COVID. But what happened? Many of these young lawyers came out and they didn't get a lot of face time. They didn't get a lot of sit down and learn from older, more experienced lawyers in how they interact with clients, how they speak, how they think through issues, how they kick it back and forth. Harder to do with Zoom. I mean, we've done an incredible job with Zoom, but there are limits to it. I think it's taught us that remote work is okay. But man, I think we're going to see an interesting over the next 3 to 5 years, what this generation of young lawyers that entered into the law firm world in an environment where no one's going to the office. Even today, we have a difficult time getting. Starts with the partners getting in there. Why should they go if the partners aren't there? I'm really worried about that, and it'll be curious to see how that impacts this generation of lawyers.
You're worried so much you're working right there from Colorado today, Mike. So
This is true, but I am heading back on Sunday.
Yeah, okay. So when you think about your young lawyers, your associates, and then your young partners, can you tell the ones that are going to be stars at this point in your career? Can you tell the ones that person's going somewhere? He's going to lead this. He or she's going to lead this firm one day.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a fire in the belly sort of thing. It's people change over time and they learn, that kind of thing. But some of the inherent things that drive success are there, whether, and they're there probably well before you ever, stepped into a law firm to your first day of work. And maybe it's something about having done well all the way through to that point in time. But yeah, it's funny that lawyers come in every shape and size and there's just every person's their own world, right? And there are millions of them. And there's some that just, there are others that you don't know actually. And you just didn't notice, but they find their path and they're brilliant. Right. So it has to do with how people present themselves sometimes, the opportunities that have been given to them to shine as well. But after, it takes a year or two of working with someone and you just build this confidence in them. And I'm thinking right now of a particular woman that I'm working with, is a senior associate at my firm, who I can trust her with the hardest matter, the hardest issue, ask her to run with it and be there if she's got a question or two, and know that the client is incredibly well served. She'll be a partner. I'm confident of that very soon. But it's always a beautiful thing to see when someone really comes into their own and achieves great success.
Yeah. Well, that's awesome, Mike. So Mike, how important has your leadership in your administrative roles at Latham especially been to your career? You could have put your head down, represent your clients, made some money, but you spent a lot of time. I remember when you guys were doing the build out in your DC office, spent a lot of time on that, but running the office, running groups, leadership, recruiting. How important is that to your career? Would you have been as well served professionally if you just would have put your head down and practiced law?
It's a great question, because I wonder about that. I'm in my 17th year of some form of firm management. I sit on the executive committee of the firm now, and I have one more year and then I roll off of my 2 terms. And I've done a bit of everything from a practice group thing. I went overseas. 9 years of that, then 4 years running the office, managing the office locally. And then of course what I'm doing right now. And sometimes it's a lot of time, Julian. And I sometimes wonder if I could have done a lot more in my private practice, right? My antitrust practice, had I not spent over 1,000 hours a year on those jobs you're talking about, the management stuff. But I don't know. There's something about it. I love our office in Washington, the people, the culture of it, watching the young lawyers develop, and how the firm has changed over time with that. And I love being a part of that. It's been, I'm a firm believer in the team concept, and so, can't look back and I can't redo things, but I think it's contributed to my success in as a practitioner. But it's also taken a toll from. I could have made the firm, had more matters and things like that. We'll see when I drop off this committee. Hopefully they'll leave me alone. I just have always responded when people ask me to do it, right? And it's it's just not something you say no to. At least I don't.
Well, look, Mike, this has been great. Last question. What advice would you give to your kids if they want to be lawyers? Do you think, would you be excited for them to practice law? Or would you have concerns?
The only thing I care about with my kids is that they go through life with a smile on their face, and that they're happy doing what they're doing. So if it's law, and if I would welcome that, I would enjoy it very much. Right now, I'm not trending well in that department, Julian. My two daughters want to go to med school, it looks like. And
oh, wow.
And my Luke is heading up to New York to do some banking. There's a chance he'll consider law school. But I would embrace that, absolutely, as long as it put a smile on their face. I think children today grow up with a tremendous amount of pressure around them. And I worry that they don't focus on being happy and having a vocation that really drives them to do great things and to help people and to be happy. So what would I tell them if they wanted to become a lawyer? And that is just, you run for daylight, and as hard as you can, learn as you go, soak it all in. And the day you stop learning is the day you should hang it up. Be passionate about your advocacy and enjoy it.
Run the daylight. It always comes back to football. So
yeah.
So Mike, this has been great. I really appreciate you doing this. You've been a great mentor to me and a good friend to me over the years. Great. You're just a great guy. The firm is lucky to have you and have you leading it instead of just practicing law. I'm sure you've made a lot of young lawyers even that much better. Make sure you say hi to your lovely wife, April, for me and your kids. And when you get back in town, love to get together and say hey to you in person.
We need some sushi, you and me.
That's right. It's been a while. What are the old places still open?
Well, we always solve the world's problems over sushi, Julian.
Dude, I never can make any inroads with you politically, but at least we had some good sushi.
Oh, you do more than you think.
Well, that's great, man. Well, we'll definitely do that when you get back in town. Until then, hope you enjoy the slopes, and I'll see you soon.
All right, pal. See you soon.
Thanks again, Mike.
I'm helpless when I'm ocean waves.